right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, we are talking about Inside, the new movie starring Willem Dafoe as an art thief who gets stuck inside of a high-rise condo filled with art and no way out and no food and no water, and he has to find a way to survive. It's from first-time director Vasilis Katsoupis, and it was in theaters for a little while. I'm putting this out when the film hits streaming, but it's definitely a film worth checking out. Definitely one of my favorites of the year so far. And I've got Ben Miller here to talk about it. We have a great conversation, lots of great puzzle pieces, so that's coming up here in a second. Before we get to the conversation, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. You could also follow us on social media at PiecingPod and join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show. Last but not least, I do want to mention our Patreon. Things were a little bit slow on there for a couple of weeks. I was busy and stuff, it happens. But I'm coming back with a whole lot of new content for the Patreon. I got a bunch of music stuff to post. I've got some advanced episodes of Piecing It Together, planning some bonus stuff for Piecing It Together. And we got another bonus episode of Awesome Movie Year coming soon. So lots of great stuff over there. Check it out, patreon.com/bydavidrosen. So with that said, let's talk about Inside. All right, Ben Miller is back with us to talk about Inside. How you doing, Ben?
Doing well, sir. How are you doing?
I am great. I am in the middle of I was like away for a little bit. I think we talked about this when we were doing our Oscar preview, like how busy I was with other things outside of Now I'm back to podcasting. Now I got to catch up and record a whole bunch of episodes. So
all the way back, yeah.
Yeah. Let's do it. Let's jump in.
Yes, sir.
I gotta ask you before we start getting into the puzzle pieces about Inside. If your house was on fire, what three things would you save?
Outside of people and animals, I'm not sure. Podcast microphone? No.
That's important. It is. Yeah.
No, that's a great question. I'm not all that materialistic when it comes to things like I really like savor. So
Yeah,
essentially,
I'm the same way.
I'm kind of like, it's like I could replace pretty much everything.
Yeah, I was thinking just pets, basically. Like,
Yeah,
that's all.
pretty much. Yeah.
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 The pets. Gina has 2 legs. She could run out. So
Exactly. Everybody else will be fine.
Yeah.
So I got all my important papers in a fireproof safe, so I don't think I have much to worry about, that kind of thing.
Yeah. All my music's in the cloud, so we're good.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Inside. Were you aware of this movie going in? Because this is one of those movies for me anyway that just kind of came out of nowhere. I felt like.
I first got the awareness. I had some like media blast, and I had those weird posters, like the one with like the pigeon, and you're like Inside, and it's Willem Dafoe, and I'm like, well, Willem Dafoe in a movie sounds interesting in and of itself. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I got reached out by the company, by the PR company, to talk to their director. It kind of fell through, but I mean, so I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll have the chance to see it. And I saw it, and I was like, that's not at all what I was really expecting it to be. It was definitely something I was like, okay, this is something different. And then you watch the movie, and you're like, this is very something, like very assured for a first time director. Very much has a lot of interesting ideas of certain things. I have actually a big theory about it at the end of it. I'll share with it, but
Okay.
a fascinating film. So I mean, I haven't seen a ton of films this year, but it's my favorite film of the year so far.
Oh, awesome. Well, I will say before we get into puzzle pieces, one thing that struck me about it, because you mentioned it being a first-time filmmaker, and it's like a very stylish film for how like small of a scope it is, just this one location film, and in a lot of ways, and I mean, I think maybe I have 1 or 2 streaming movies on my list, but in a lot of ways, it reminded me of a movie we'd see straight to streaming.
Yeah.
Except for I don't know if it's because we saw it in a theater, or at least I did, or if it's just maybe a little bit more of an interesting film. This one really stuck with me in a way that a lot of streaming movies, you kind of forget a week later. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
this
yeah.
one, this one I keep ruminating on, and it's really staying with me. So I'm
Yeah, there's a lot goes into it. It's not something where you're just like, "Okay, well, that was kind of" like, even I bet you even people that hated it, you're like, "Well, certainly memorable." It's not one that you're just immediately gonna go off and be like, "I forgot about Inside." No, 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 you
yeah.
kinda sticks with you.
Absolutely. Well, we'll talk all about like what's going on here, and I'm definitely looking forward to your theory a little later. But what do you have for your first puzzle piece?
My first puzzle piece, it's hard to say that this could be a puzzle piece for this film just because how many people really saw it, but At Eternity's Gate, in another Willem
Mm,
Dafoe Oscar nomination where he plays Vincent Van Gogh, a a film where Dafoe is very much, even though there are people around him, he is very much alone, and he is very
mm,
much in his own type of world despite being everything around, and he's very, very secluded and sad and, in a fragile state, and on top of that all, it's very art centric
yeah,
and
sure.
looks around and obviously a Van Gogh type stuff. Anything involving Van Gogh is gonna be art specific, and art is so important to Inside, and all that kinda stuff. I can't imagine, if the idea of this film came about and they're like, "Oh, well, let's do, At Eternity's Gate," but, like, what if it was modern and, pandemic centric, essentially like, "Oh, we're gonna only have one person," worse things to do than Willem Dafoe. And At Eternity's
Sure.
Gate's kind of the benchmark for like, "Well, this is a good way to make this happen."
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this being like a one person film and being an art based film, I mean
Yeah.
that's an interesting puzzle piece to kick it off with. And of course, yeah, I mean, you kind of come to this for Willem Dafoe. It's like the Willem
Yeah.
Dafoe show. It's basically him the whole time. I mean, there's
Mhm.
other people on screen, but he's the only one who's really, carrying the thing. And so
Yeah.
it's a great performance, and it gives you exactly what you're kind of hoping for out of a one person show like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
I'll go for my first puzzle piece. I was talking about streaming movies. This actually is one that I think about it. Alexandre has Oxygen from
Mm.
2021,
Nice.
which was like this is like a whole subgenre of these like one person stuck in one place kind of
Yep.
movies, but
Yep.
this one was interestingly high tech because this woman awakens in a cryogenic chamber in outer space, has no idea how she got there, and she basically can't move, can't do anything. The whole thing is in this chamber,
Mm.
and you get all this very high tech story stuff, all kinds of weird technology going on and things that she
Mhm.
needs to pay attention to in order to be able to survive the situation. And while Willem Dafoe has an entire apartment to kind of walk around in and kind of plan his escape and try to figure out ways to survive, it's still very similar in all of the high techness of that cage that he's basically in, and just how sleek and slick everything is. Again, it feels like very 21st century in the way that this is being
Yeah.
filmed, the way that it's being presented. And that's a really cool, interesting movie, Oxygen. I don't think enough people watched.
It's a really interesting level of claustrophobia. Obviously, Oxygen, where inside, yeah, he's stuck in this one apartment. In Oxygen, it's there's nowhere to move. Like it's
Yeah.
you're yeah, it's very much more claustrophobic. But a different kind of claustrophobia, like claustrophobia with neon, like if that makes any sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a really good one. I was trying to think of some other like single person films with those kind of ideas, and yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really good one. That's one that I didn't think of.
Right on. Well, what do you have for your next piece?
This is the again, almost like Eternity's Gate. It's like the chances of this being an actual puzzle piece are probably pretty slim, but regardless, Alien 3,
Ooh.
um neglected of the Alien franchise, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, David Fincher's first film. I think of it I thought of it in the terms of, okay, so it's essentially a prison movie, but it's a prison movie without guards. Like,
Mm.
it's, everybody is stuck in one place and kind of trying to survive and escape at the same time, but survival is more important. And Inside is definitely on that same track of okay, well, escaping is one thing, but then it turns to a point where you're like, okay, now I just need to stay alive. And what
Mhm.
ingenuity do I need to do to stay alive? And Alien 3, obviously, you have the xenomorph running around, and that kind of complicates things, obviously. But in this case, it's just it's not it's not something actively trying to kill you, it's yourself depleting the resources, uh,
Sure.
in order to stay alive. And I kept thinking Alien 3 just because of that exact point, just, like, there's nothing oppressing you except the coldness of your surroundings. Like, it's
Mm.
not like the
Sure.
Shawshank Redemption where you have to fight against the guards and the warden. It's nope, you're it's very, very difficult to escape, and your environment is actively trying to murder you
Yeah.
through various means, either an alien or just by the sake of, it's too hot or it's too cold.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that, 3 puzzle pieces in so far, we've already got 2 sci-fi pieces, which
Right?
the movie's not a sci-fi in
At
any
all,
way.
at all. Yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
that's really interesting, but I love that. It's a great one,
yeah.
a great one to bring into this. I'm gonna go with more of like, I guess you would say a trope, for a piece, so you could bring a bunch of different things in, but basically deal with the devil stories.
Mm,
Devil and Daniel Webster, or even the
sure.
song "Devil Went Down to Georgia" or the Tenacious D movie. But obviously, I brought up the 3 things you'd bring when your house is
Mm,
on fire, and this is how we start the movie and end the movie with Willem Dafoe answering that question. And the most important thing clearly is his sketchbook, because this guy wanted to be an artist, and instead he kind of took the worst way out of being an art
mhm.
thief instead. And
Yeah,
of course it's going to go wrong, and it's going to be his undoing. And so, just like with any of those deal with the devil type stories, taking the easy way out always ends up being that person's undoing and never works out for the best. And that's exactly what's going on here and inside.
yeah, that's a really good point, and it's like, okay, well, how long are you going to be playing with fire until you get burned?
Hmm.
You know, that's kind of the classic conundrum of all, like, thief movies of,
Yeah.
okay, well, if you're so intelligent, why are you a thief? And
Right.
it's that type of thing, like, "Oh, you can be as careful as you well, it's easier." It's like, "Well, but if you're intelligent, you gotta know you're gonna get caught eventually," and, I was waiting for the inevitable, "This was supposed to be my last job," and it never,
Right.
luckily
Right.
it never came, but yeah, that's a really good point, I really like that point.
Right on. What do you got for your next one?
I'm gonna go sci-fi again,
Ooh.
just because now, for very obvious reasons, but, the Martian, whenever
Mm.
especially there's a scene where, Willem Dafoe is, making food, and he's making pasta, and
Yeah.
he's acting like it's a cooking show,
Sure.
but the cool thing about it is it's in a very, like, okay, if Willem Dafoe was hosting a cooking show, how is it? It's like, oh, it's incredibly deadpan. There's not much expression to it, but it's still Willem Dafoe watchability. He's like,
Hmm.
okay, so we'll have this for about a day. It's like, how's this one? Al dente, okay, like, and, and The Martian, is the greatest example probably of, like, okay, if you're by yourself and you have that personality, you have to entertain yourself, and that's
Sure.
essentially what he's doing for large swaths of this movie. He's like, "Well, I have to do something to," like, the Macarena, as every time he opens the fridge, the first couple
Yeah.
times you're like, it's annoying. Then after a while, he's singing along the Macarena because otherwise he would be insane.
Yeah.
By the way, what is your opinion on how long he's actually in there? How long? What's the time frame of this film?
That's a good question, because, I mean, it's days for sure, if not
Obviously.
weeks.
Hmm.
Yeah, like how long though? It's really hard to tell, because he is losing it,
Yeah,
as he's stuck in there. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's got to be weeks at this
I would
point,
think
and
so too.
he's not okay by the
No,
end. And I suppose it's also up to interpretation whether he really
it's
got out or
true.
not at the
Yeah,
end,
it's true.
because they show that final shot, and his sculpture that he builds to climb up there, it's not even close enough for him
No,
to have
no,
really
yeah.
gotten
I was
out.
about to say, even if you get that bottom glass off, and it's like, you're telling me you're able to get up there and you're barely working on food, but yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, more conundrums from there.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the sign of a great movie for sure.
On
So
top of that, with The Martian, it's kind of like, okay, I'm in this situation. and I have to use my own ingenuity to survive without
Mhm.
anybody now at the same time, it's like the fun thing I really like about The Martian is he doesn't really make a mistake to
Mhm.
to put him in danger. It's just kind of the circumstances. Now, Defoe does make some mistakes along the way of the things he does, but it's not like he does something stupid. He just
Mhm.
is kind of put into the situation where something has gone wrong.
Yeah.
And yeah, kind of interesting parallels between the two.
To that point, I didn't write it down, but I think you could probably bring Castaway in
Yeah,
as,
yeah.
another one right in there with The Martian with the same ideas of the guy, trying to keep himself busy and,
Hmm.
use his
Yep.
own ingenuity to get out. So that could kind of combine in there with The Martian.
It's a
But
good point. Yep.
I will go for my next piece. You already brought in another Willem Dafoe film, so I'm gonna go with The Lighthouse.
Mm.
This
Yes.
time he's all alone, but there he's with Robert Pattinson, of course,
Yeah.
and still losing his mind, stranded in this one place where there's no getting out of. And again, this is the Willem Dafoe show. You're here to watch
Absolutely.
this guy entertain himself, go crazy, try to
Mhm.
survive, all the things, and he does it so well. I mean, he is just such a watchable person, and as he is just doing all this stuff trying to survive, that's the main thing. It's a survival film first and foremost, and it is just it's weird because it seems like such a beautiful apartment and so like cozy and everything,
Yeah.
but in this situation of being stuck in there with absolutely no way out, it's like the opposite, and it's just the most horrid conditions, and so
Yeah.
it's hard not to think of The Lighthouse.
Well, it's kinda like I always kinda go to the idea of that the guy's bathtub. It's like, "Oh, man,
Mhm.
that thing's huge. That'd be so much fun to be, like, nice warm bath, and you're sitting in there," and then he ends up having to use it as a toilet, and you're
Yeah.
just like, "Well, it's like, really what side are you looking at it in?" And, yeah, and The Lighthouse is a like Willem Dafoe is undeniably more interesting when he's unhinged.
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
I mean, don't be wrong, he can you think of the Florida Project, and he's a very normal, sweet man, and
Sure.
he's very still very watchable, but at the same time, there's a he's such an odd looking and appearing man that
Mhm.
spinning him up and having him be a little wacky is that much more fun.
Yeah, definitely. He's great.
He is great,
Um,
yes.
what do you have for your next piece?
I have another one of those, single person show movies. It's
Mhm.
All Is Lost, from JC Sandor with, Robert Redford. Um,
Okay.
the big difference being that, Redford in All Is Lost probably says, what, 50 lines the whole movie. He doesn't talk much at all because he's on a boat by himself, and really you know, Defoe does not have talking about The Martian, he does not have the, gift of gab that Matt Damon had in this movie. He's much quieter and much more calculating, and
Mhm.
as opposed to, just going in and being like, "Well, I'm gonna document everything and have it on video," and da da he's much more like, "No, this is a I'm gonna" you kinda gruff through things and look up and, like, it's so interesting how the movie has him talk enough to make it informative for the viewer, but he doesn't have
Mhm.
him talk too much. He still is like, "Well, he's by himself. Why would he be talking?" And then after a
Sure.
while, you're like, "Well, he's nuts or he's losing his mind, so he needs to
Yeah.
start talking." And All is Lost goes too much towards the "why is he not talking"
Mm.
side.
Right.
But regardless, it's the same level of, connection of, this is in this situation, it's this guy propelled in this situation. There's a ton of these movies, and half of how many just one person show movies can you add? But yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Absolutely. I actually never saw All Is Lost, but to that point about the amount of talking, I was trying to think of a piece which I never was able to come up with it, but something where somebody's watching people on a TV screen and kind of creating their own little relationship with them, even though they're not interacting with them whatsoever. And the way
Yeah,
the way that he's like talking to the maid through the TV screen
yeah.
and I couldn't think of it though. But definitely to that point though about the amount of talking that he does. Like
Mm,
it's all to himself. It's all clear that he's kind of losing it, but uh yeah, I wasn't sure which piece to use there. But for another piece though, I will go with The Shining, Stanley
mm,
Kubrick's The Shining.
yes, yes.
Obviously this guy kind of losing his mind in isolation. You've got the visions start to happen. The little girl and the dog outside the window definitely could be a good comparison to the two little girls in The Shining. Um, even the dream sequence where he meets the famous artist whose apartment it is kind of reminiscent of the party scene in The
Yeah,
Shining.
yeah, Grady and yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
So
good
I
point.
think there's a lot there. I think that was probably a pretty clear inspiration here.
Yeah, there's a lot more horror influences in this movie than you would expect. Like
Hmm.
you would expect the certain things like, oh, it's like something kind of scary. It's like this is it's hard to describe it as a thriller, but it
Hmm.
kind of is. Like
Yeah.
it's like, well, it's just one person in one room, and that's essentially the gist of it. And but the yeah like the cold concrete corners and the like the architecture of The Shining, and just that, the hotel being as its own kind of character, same things,
Yeah.
this apartment being its own kind of character.
Yeah, absolutely, you're right. And when he finds that hidden room, that's also kind
Yeah,
of a
yeah,
that kind of fits into with the secrets that hotel kind of
yeah,
holds. So,
yeah.
yeah. What do you have for your next piece?
Okay, this I keep, this was a tough one to kind of find pieces for. I know we talked about that in our Banshees episode. We're just like, man, it's like I'm sure there's some movie that we haven't seen that is probably an influence of this. I'm gonna go a little bit off the beaten path. How about 2019's Velvet Buzzsaw? Um,
All right. I was
it
hoping you would bring this one up because
okay, really?
because it came to mind for me, but I've actually never seen it. Like
Okay,
I
so
I always wanted to, and it seems like theme wise, it's probably in the same ballpark at least.
now Velvet Buzzsaw, I don't think it's a great, like, it tries a lot of stuff that it really misses at, but I mean,
Hmm.
it's trying, essentially being like, what if horror and art were linked?
Hmm.
And, the artistic aspect of everything that happens in this movie, especially, like, when he finds that other room with the one painting he was looking for in the dummy dead body, you're just like, "Okay, well, this is, like, his they're trying to say something about art." And
Yeah.
the entire the final thing that he says, essentially his last lines in the movie, he talks about the 3 things he would take: art survives. He's like, "I'm sorry I destroyed your apartment, but maybe it needed to be destroyed." Like,
Hmm.
about how art is only as successful as its destruction, or
Hmm.
and the is the artist destroyed? Kinda goes back to Eternity's Gate, like, how much is art an extension of the artist, and is
Yeah.
this like my artistic expression of having to destroy your apartment? And Velvet Buzzsaw, with those kind of, the wild swings that that movie has, obviously that's a big ensemble, but how the violence inherent with art,
Yeah.
the 2 go in hand in hand.
Yeah, I think it's such a rich world to kind of skewer and discuss that like high end art world and like where does it end the art? Like, is it just those
Yeah.
paintings on the wall, or is it everything that's happening to him and his whole journey? And is it the movie we're
Uh-huh.
watching about this? Like, it's a really interesting thing, and it makes for great fertile ground to like have a
Mhm.
story with like a lot of angles that you kind of approach it from. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I like that a lot. I I went on a little bit of a journey for my next piece.
Okay.
So I started off thinking about the Banshees of Inisherin because this guy who's like so obsessed with his art that he's throwing away his connection to
Mm.
friends and being a nice
Yeah.
person and
Yeah.
all that. So that to Willem Dafoe's character being going from artist to art thief and kind of like losing
Mhm.
himself in that process, that brought me to one of the puzzle pieces we talked about on that episode, Inside Llewyn Davis from the Coen
Ooh,
brothers,
ooh,
about a guy who is just completely, his whole life is his art and it's not going anywhere for him. And it, kind of goes down the tubes from there. But that brought me to my actual piece here, which is another Coen brothers movie, Barton Fink.
ooh.
Which that is where I'm going with this screenwriter whose writer's block takes him into this awful hellish scenario. And again, it all three of these really just about these people who are so obsessed with their art that it kind of destroys them. And we talked about it earlier with the deal with the devil thing. um this guy clearly cared so much about art, but cared to a point where it kind of ruined him, and he ended up in this art thief world, and that led to this really bad job, and that led to him going crazy and probably dying, as we
Yeah.
said, although we don't know for sure. But yeah, it's a whole lot of characters who just that obsession destroys them, basically.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a really good point of everything. It's just interesting how, the Coens kinda have that idea in their head about, like, you know, art is important, but at the same time, it can destroy you if it
Hmm.
can lead you down a path if you not even necessarily don't have the best intentions. It's like, well, you just need to be realistic about it, and if you are not realistic about it, it could really just boggle the mind in a way that's you're never gonna like. Like,
Yeah.
Barton Fink is a really interesting side of that where he's like, "Okay, well, you're gonna be, not only is he in this kind of, like, actual purgatory, he's in, like, work purgatory as well." Like,
Sure.
and Willem Dafoe in this movie is not necessarily it's like, "Well, you're not dead. You're alive, but you're not in jail, but are you in jail?" Like, it's
Sure.
like I was wondering a lot of times during the movie, it's like, how happy would he be for the cops to break down the door? It's like, it's like, "I'm out of this apartment. It's fine by me." Yeah, yeah.
Right, sure. It's funny too with the Coen brothers, like, you know, us film nerds, like, we probably read into every single little hidden thing in all of their movies,
Yep.
but in any interview you see with the Coen brothers, it's like, well, why did this happen to this? And they're like, I don't know, because it was funny. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
like
Yeah.
whether it's true or not, they act like they didn't think at all about these like hidden things and
Yeah,
stuff.
it's, we always kind of, there's what's the famous line about a guy was, an art student was asked to draw a man under a streetlight, and he did it without hands, and then the teacher's like, "Well, without hands means his," and he goes into this big philosophical reasoning, and he goes, "No, no, I just can't draw hands." Like,
Yeah.
it's something that simple, yeah.
Nice. That's great. Well, what do you have for your next piece?
Okay, so this is my last one because, this is it's cheating, but it's
Oh,
COVID-19. It's the pandemic. This
oh, sure.
without the pandemic, this movie, I cannot imagine this movie happening because
Mhm.
I've always been really fascinated with how directors have had to be, adaptive to COVID-19. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you have, um, there are those levels of like, oh, this movie is about where everybody's on Zoom or we're
Mm.
stuck in an apartment together, and I'm just like, oh, okay, fine. Like, I've really been interested on how directors use COVID and the pandemic to frame a story, like Kimmy last year with Steven Soderbergh.
Mhm.
That was the perfect framing of having that around and the anxieties inherent in that, but also having an interesting story. At the same time, you have a movie like Good Luck to You, Leo Grand,
Yeah.
where it's two people in a room, but it doesn't feel like a COVID movie. It just happens to be
Right.
two people in the room. Same thing with like Windfall from Netflix from last year with Jason Segel. Like,
Love that movie.
yeah, exactly. You put it like it's not necessarily a situation where it feels like a COVID movie and like the director clicks the camera, says action, and runs away so they get the social distancing. It's like this one
Mhm.
is obviously pandemic filmed, but at no point was I like, oh, this feels like a pandemic movie because it's not like there's a distance with people whenever they had the pandemic filming of like, "Oh, I gotta stay away and my distance and all this kinda stuff." And in this case, you're just like, "Man, this is yeah, it's only Willem Dafoe, but man, they are really getting in his face. They're really in, the intimacy of it all is something that differentiates it from other pandemic movies. I
Yeah.
never and the whole time I was thinking, it's like, man, it doesn't feel like one. And anytime anybody can film a movie during the pandemic and it doesn't feel like a pandemic movie, it's a win.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like you said, you can tell so easily a lot of the times, but this is one of those few ones where it's like, maybe they just wanted to make a one person movie. Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of hard to tell.
Yeah,
So
and the stars and the germs align to make it all happen. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I will go with my last piece, which also a little out of the box one. I'm going to go with a couple of video games for my last piece. Combine them
Ooh.
here. I'm going to go with The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild and
Okay.
Portal.
Sure.
Both are games where you just need to figure out a way to solve the puzzle, and there's no set way. It's just whatever you figure out. If it works, it works. And we only briefly discussed it, but in order to try to escape from this room that Willem Dafoe is stuck in, he just starts tearing this apartment apart to build a structure that he can climb up to the ceiling, the skylight on the ceiling, and break himself out that way. And this is I don't know if you're much of a gamer, but like if you go on YouTube and search for Zelda Breath of the Wild videos, there are people that come up with things there's no way even the designers of the game even thought of trying to do, like
Sure.
throwing a rock on top of a raft on top of a this and then shooting it out into the sky, and like they do all kinds of crazy shit, and they're actually like
Sure.
really fun to watch. And
Sure.
yeah, there's like no rules. It's like just try whatever you can try. And it feels like that's what Willem Dafoe's character is doing here to try to break out. And it's crazy and it's really weird. And it's something you never really have seen in a movie. So I thought of these games as examples of where that
It's
happens.
interesting, the big thing, especially with inside, is okay, so what steps are you willing to take whenever you don't have to worry about anything else? Like
Yeah.
like you don't have anybody else looking at you, you don't have anybody to answer for, you don't have any human decency to even have to adhere to. It's like, okay, you just have to do like, when you're gonna abandon all the things that usually dominate your life, how are you going to make this equation work out for you? And
Hmm.
essentially, that's what he does. He's like, "Okay, I don't care about any of the rest of this stuff. Like, I don't care about what I look like, what I'm wearing, what state I'm leaving this apartment in. It's just the end goal is the end goal, and that's all that matters, and I'll
Yeah.
burn down the world in between, but that's what matters." And that's a really interesting way to put it.
Right on. Well, I will read down the list of all the puzzle pieces we just talked about, and we'll get into some closing thoughts. But we talked about At Eternity's Gate, Oxygen, Alien 3, the Deal with the Devil stories, and then The Martian. We threw in Castaway as well in there. The Lighthouse, All Is Lost, The Shining, Velvet Buzzsaw, Barton Fink, the COVID-19 pandemic, and The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild or Portal. Yeah, like we said, a lot of sci-fi,
Oh,
strangely,
yeah,
in this
yeah,
conversation, and
yeah.
it's interesting that it kind of went that way. Um, I I I don't know. I'm trying to think of like what else because it's such a weird, unique movie. Like we talked about it being like the one person, one location movie, but it's also just not really something I've seen before quite like this. Another one on
No.
my list was 127 Hours.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people have mentioned Locke with Tom
Locker,
Hardy.
buried.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
there's a lot of those, but none of them are quite like this, where he's got all this room, he's got all these options to him,
Yes.
but he's still stuck, and there's no getting out.
So I wanted to share my theory with you for real quick.
Yes.
So obviously he breaks in, he's looking for this one specific painting and can't find it. He eventually finds it, days or weeks later, in the apartment. And meanwhile, everything's kind of going crazy. My theory is that the owner of this apartment did this on purpose.
Mm,
And he knew he arranged this art theft and arranged for him to be in and it's like, I'm going to turn off the water except for those little sprinklers every once in a while. There's going to be very sparse food. There's going to be all the doors are locked. The thermostat's going to go wacky. And like essentially, it's essentially a week long art exhibit for
yeah.
his own like what will be created with this destruction. And
Mm,
my theory is it's like okay, I might end up killing this guy, but that's art for art's sake. And
Sure.
so my theory is that it's like it was all on purpose and he was an unwitting pawn in this guy's twisted art idea.
I love it. I love it. And that could so well be. I mean, obviously, this movie hides a lot of like secrets and there's
Oh
kind
yeah.
of no telling for sure whether or not something like that is true, but I could totally see that being accurate. I'll tell you, since you're bringing up theories here, I'll bring up something that kind of came to my mind while I was watching this movie, but he tries so many things to get out.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, what if just putting those paintings back on their hooks would have released the doors?
That's
Like it
an
won't
edge.
open without the paintings all being in their spots.
It's essentially you have to abandon the
Yeah.
entire goal of what you're there for. You get to
Yeah.
escape, but can't make it
Yeah.
out with anything. That's really
Sure.
interesting too.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's and like you said, there's such a disconnect on what is actually happening and what actually happened. Like
Mhm.
that one art showing in that house when Defoe was there, like the flashback,
Yeah.
and that woman who might be the maid and might
Right.
not be the maid is there. Like, did that actually happen, or is he just imagining it? Um, yeah, I mean, a that's what makes a film like this so interesting. It's not something that
Sure.
goes out of your head, and you can kind of theorize about all the different things that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the mark of a good one. So,
Yep.
definitely. Well, is there another movie you watched recently you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Oh, let's see. I've been trying to catch up on the films of. I'm about to do a series on the films of 1973, 50 years ago, the various Oscar films. So I've been trying to watch as many of those as I can. I just watched Paper Moon for the first time. What a
Okay.
delight, just top to bottom. Really big fan of Paper Moon. At the same time, I also watched Happy Go Lucky for the first time a couple of days ago from Mike
Right on.
Lee. That's the movie that Sally Hawkins should be remembered for. Also, despite it taking place in 2008, Mike Lee was somehow able to predict QAnon incel behavior. Uh, it was in Eddie Marzin's character. I don't know how he does it, but I was like, "Wow, this is really prescient." So, yeah,
That's funny.
highly recommend those 2.
Right on. Yeah, great picks there for sure. I haven't seen Happy Go Lucky since it came out. That was really good. Uh,
Andrea
yeah.
Riseborough's in it for 2 seconds. You're just like,
Oh
"Why
yeah.
is she in this movie?" And obviously, this is before she was famous, but yeah, a really fascinating movie.
Right on. Well, Ben, thank you again for doing the show. Tell people where they can find you and your podcast.
You can follow me on Twitter, Neb has been on Letterboxd, at Neb810 on Instagram, and Ben Miller Movies. I have my website, icecreamforfreaks.com. You can follow my other writings with the Film Experience Cinema Scholars. My podcast with my brother, the film critic and the common man, dropping new episodes weekly on various films. Um, he just got mad at me because I said I hated the film Fury from David Ayer. He loves
Mm.
it. So it's like we're going to have some lively debating about that soon. You can find me on Twitter. Find that pod on Twitter at Critic Comment Pod. Available on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, I remember last time you were on, you mentioned you had just done an episode on The Town, and I just rewatched it like two
Yeah.
days ago. So I'm going to listen to that this
Oh,
week. I'm
thank you.
looking forward to
Perfect.
it.
I appreciate anybody listening to our podcast. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, again, thank you, and hopefully we'll get you back again sometime soon.
My pleasure, David.
Hey, I'm Josh Bell.
I'm Jason Harris. Hey, Josh, we're friends in real life, but we're also co-hosts on this new podcast called
Awesome Movie Year, where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies and do a deep dive looking at movies including the Best Picture winner, the biggest movie at the box office, future cult classics, and more.
including the biggest flop. And this season, we're doing 1994. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. That could be Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify. We're all over the web as well at Awesome Movie Year on all the socials and awesomemovieyear.com. So please like us, subscribe, and if you do like us, give us a 5-star rating because we love you.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about Inside. Thanks to Ben Miller for stopping by to talk about it. I love that movie. People should check it out if you haven't yet. And you should also make sure you're subscribed to Piecing It Together, wherever it is that you're listening right now, wherever your favorite place is to listen to podcasts. Make sure you're subscribed. Drop a 5-star rating while you're at it, too. We really appreciate that. You could also follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. Join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces. And I told you about the Patreon at the top of the show, but I'll tell you about it again. There's lots of great content over there, and I have a bunch of music-related stuff I'll be posting soon, as well as a new awesome movie or bonus episode and some advanced episodes of Piecing It Together. So make sure to check it out, patreon.com/bydavidrosen. So with that said, let's close this out with a piece of music like I always do. And you know what? This being a film about art, you can't make art without inspiration. So I'm going to play a song called Inspiration from my latest album, More Content. This album just came out on New Year's Eve, and I have a couple more music videos on the way, actually. That at the time I'm recording this episode, I need to get these things finished so I can get back to work getting those last couple of music videos done. But yeah, I'm still working on promoting this album, so I hope you check it out. More content is available wherever you could stream music, and of course there's a limited edition CD on my Bandcamp. And I'm working on new music already, but make sure to check out more content if you haven't yet. This is Inspiration from that album. Hope you enjoy it. We'll be back with more Piecing It Together real soon.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.